My name is Emily Carter. I'm 27 years old, and this is the story of how the happiest day of my life turned into the loneliest memory I'll never forget. Before I begin, if you've ever felt abandoned by the people who should have loved you the most, then pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me, because this isn't just my story, it could be yours too. That's how I want to start, because the truth is, my story begins like a fairy tale dream. From the very first day I stepped into college, I carried a vision inside me. I imagined walking across the graduation stage, holding my diploma high in the air, with my family sitting proudly in the crowd. I imagined hearing them clap louder than anyone else, cheering my name, screaming, "That's our girl, Emily." My heart held on to this vision every single time I struggled through late-night assignments, every time I thought of quitting, every time I doubted myself. You see, my family wasn't perfect, but they were mine. My dad, Robert Carter, loved football more than anything else in the world. My mom, Linda, was the glue who held us together, but she often bent her priorities around Dad's passions. Then there was my older brother, Mark, who followed in Dad's footsteps, obsessed with the game, always talking stats, scores, and teams. And finally, my younger sister, Chloe, the carefree one, who often floated between following Mom and siding with Mark. Together, they were my world. Imperfect, chaotic, loud, but mine. And so, I pictured them all there with me on graduation day. Dad in his favorite leather jacket, even though it would clash horribly with the formality of the event. Mom, teary-eyed with her camera out, snapping too many pictures of me in my cap and gown. Mike, probably cracking a joke about how graduation is just practice for the real game of life. And Chloe, smiling and hugging me, telling me she always believed I'd make it. That dream was what kept me going. In my head, graduation wasn't just about me, it was about us. It was about finally giving my parents a reason to be proud beyond football. It was about showing my brother that academics mattered just as much as touchdowns. It was about proving to my sister that hard work could lead to something bigger. I held onto this dream so tightly that I almost ignored the signs leading up to graduation week. At the dinner table, the conversations were never about me. They were about the Super Bowl. Who was bringing what food to the party? Which TV channel had the best commentary? Who was coming over to watch the game? I would casually mention, my graduation's coming up, and they would smile, nod, and then go right back to talking about football plays. I brushed it off, convincing myself they were just distracted. But inside, a small voice whispered, "What if they don't come?" I silenced that thought. My family may have been forgetful, but they weren't heartless. They wouldn't miss something this important. I told myself that over and over again. The night before graduation, I laid out my gown on the bed, smoothing every crease. I stood in front of the mirror with my cap on, pretending to smile for imaginary cameras. For a moment, I closed my eyes and could almost hear my mom's laugh, my dad's booming cheer, my brother's teasing, my sister's excitement. I whispered, "Tomorrow, they'll be there. They have to be." That morning, I woke up with butterflies. I got dressed slowly, carefully applying makeup, making sure every detail was perfect. My phone buzzed, and my heart skipped a beat. I thought it was my family texting me encouragement. But no, it was the family group chat, blowing up with messages about the Super Bowl snacks. "Don't forget extra wings. Chips and dip ready. Kickoff time reminder." My chest tightened. I scrolled through, desperately searching for a message, any message, about me, my graduation, this once-in-a-lifetime milestone. But there was nothing. Just food, football, and excitement that had nothing to do with me. I wanted to text them, to beg them to come, but my pride held me back. This was supposed to be their moment to show up for me without being reminded. If I had to ask, what would it even mean? Still, I left the house with hope. I got into my car, diploma dreams heavy in my mind, and drove to the venue. The parking lot buzzed with families, cars decorated with balloons, proud parents carrying bouquets of flowers, siblings holding handmade signs. Everywhere I looked, joy spilled out of every corner. I walked inside, my eyes scanning the rows of seats. Surely, they were just running late. Surely, they would be there, waving at me from across the auditorium, smiling so wide that I'd feel their love across the distance. I clutched my gown tighter, telling myself they were coming. But the seats where my family should have been sat empty. The emptiness hit me harder than any punch could have. I froze, my smile faltering, my stomach twisting. My dad wasn't there. My mom wasn't there. Mark wasn't there. Chloe wasn't there. The Carter family, my family, wasn't there. As I sat down with the other graduates, trying to hide my panic, I kept glancing back at those empty seats. Maybe they would walk in any second. Maybe this was just a delay. But the longer I waited, the clearer it became. They had chosen something else. Not me. Not my graduation. The Super Bowl. At that moment, I felt something inside me shatter. The dream I had held onto for years, gone in an instant. The moment I saw those empty seats, something inside me cracked. I told myself not to cry, not here, not now. Maybe they would still show up. Maybe they were stuck in traffic. Maybe Mom was parking the car while Dad walked in with Chloe and Mark. I clung to those excuses the way a drowning person clings to a piece of driftwood. But with each name the announcer read, with each family I saw standing and cheering, my hope faded. I looked down at my lap, my hands gripping the fabric of my gown so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I couldn't look at the crowd anymore. It hurt too much. Every cheer for another student felt like a stab in my chest. That should have been my cheer. That should have been my family. Instead, I was sitting in a sea of joy, drowning in silence. I pulled out my phone under the table, desperate for some sign. My notifications were blowing up. For a second, my heart leapt. Maybe it was them saying they were on their way. But when I unlocked the screen, reality hit me harder than before. The group chat was buzzing again, but not about me. Pizza delivery confirmed. Make sure we've got enough sodas. Game starts at 6:30 sharp. Don't be late. I stayed at those words, my stomach twisting. My family wasn't late. They weren't lost. They weren't even thinking about me. They were at home, celebrating a game, preparing snacks, making memories, while I was sitting here alone on the most important day of my life. It wasn't just that they missed my graduation. It was what it meant. They chose football over me. They chose food, laughter, and touchdowns over my years of sacrifice. I wanted to scream. I matter too. I've worked for this. Why can't you see me just this once? But the only sound was the announcer calling out another name, followed by another wave of cheers that didn't belong to me. The realization sank in slowly, painfully, like poison spreading through my veins. All these years, I had believed that if I worked hard enough, if I achieved something big enough, they would finally notice me. But this moment proved the truth I had been too afraid to face. I would never be more important than their distractions. No degree, no success, no milestone would ever change that. When the graduates around me whispered excitedly about spotting their families in the crowd, I forced a smile and nodded as if I understood. But inside, I felt like a ghost, present, but unseen. My classmates waved to parents holding flowers, siblings holding banners. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, praying no one would notice that my row of seats was empty. As the ceremony went on, my heart grew heavier. The emptiness of those seats became unbearable. I kept imagining them there, trying to fill the silence with memories that didn't exist. I pictured Dad yelling my name, Mom waving, Chloe clapping, Mark whistling loudly just to embarrass me. But every time I blinked, all I saw was emptiness. That emptiness was louder than any cheer. It screamed at me. It told me the truth I didn't want to hear. You don't matter to them the way they matter to you. And in that moment, I felt a shift. At first, it was anger. Hot, burning anger that rose from my stomach and tightened my chest. How could they? How could my own blood abandon me for something so meaningless? How could Dad choose a game over his daughter? How could Mom, who always said family comes first, stay home to save snacks instead of sitting here with me? How could Mark, my big brother, who was supposed to look out for me, completely ignore the biggest achievement of my life? How could Chloe, who shared my secrets, my laughter, my tears, not even send me a simple message of support? But underneath the anger was something even heavier, sorrow. Not the kind that passes with time, but the kind that carves itself into your soul. I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be second place in their lives. I wasn't the touchdown. I wasn't the winning goal. I wasn't even the halftime show. I was just background noise. The ceremony blurred around me. I couldn't hear the speeches, couldn't feel the excitement. I sat there in my chair, a hollow shell, waiting for my name to be called, knowing when it came, the only sound would be strangers clapping politely. No cheers, no whistles. No, that's my girl. And when my name did echo through the auditorium, I stood up, my legs trembling. The walk to the stage stretched out like a lifetime. The lights were bright, the applause steady, but it felt like I was walking in a void. I forced a smile for the cameras, but my heart was shattering with every step. By the time I took my diploma, the realization was complete. My family had chosen, and it wasn't me. I walked back to my seat, clutching the diploma like it was proof that I existed, proof that I had achieved something, proof that I mattered, even if the people I loved most didn't see it. But the truth was bitter. A piece of paper couldn't replace the presence of my family. It couldn't fill the empty seats. It couldn't erase the ache of being unwanted. I sat down, staring at the stage but seeing nothing. All I could hear was the faint sound of my phone buzzing in my bag. More messages, more laughter, more excitement about the game. That's when it hit me like a final blow. They weren't missing me by accident. They weren't caught up in something they couldn't escape. They chose this. They chose football, pizza, and wings over me. And that choice changed everything. In that instant, my view of them, and of myself, shifted forever. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't unworthy. But to them, I would never be enough. And once I accepted that truth, there was no going back. When I sat back down with the diploma clutched tightly in my hands, it felt less like a victory and more like a weight I didn't know how to carry. I stared at the golden seal, tracing its edges with my fingers as if the texture could convince me this moment meant something. But the truth was clear. The most important faces in my life weren't there to see it. And then, the moment came, the one I had been both anticipating and dreading. My row stood up, and it was time for me to walk across that stage. I had rehearsed this in my mind so many times. I imagined myself walking tall, shoulders back, head high, glowing with pride. I imagined the cheers of my family echoing across the auditorium, imagined Mom's camera flashing, Dad whistling, Chloe shouting my name, and Mark laughing with pride. But now, none of that was real. The announcer's voice rang out, Emily Carter. The sound should have filled me with joy. Instead, it hollowed me out. My name floated in the air, but it felt detached, like it belonged to someone else. I rose from my seat on legs that trembled more than I wanted anyone to see. The graduates around me smiled, beaming as they looked toward their families, but I kept my eyes fixed forward. I didn't dare glance at those empty seats again. It would crush me completely. As I took the first step, the applause began. Hundreds of hands clapping, voices cheering politely, the generic noise of support. But not my support. Not the voices I craved. Not the people who mattered most. The applause sounded hollow, echoing in my ears like mockery. Listen, Emily. Strangers will clap for you, but your own family won't even show up. The walk felt endless. The distance between my chair and the stage stretched like a mile. Every step pounded with the weight of absence. I tried to hold my head high, but my throat burned with the effort of swallowing back tears. When I reached the stairs leading up to the stage, I froze for a fraction of a second. I looked out at the sea of faces, smiling, cheering, celebrating their loved ones. I searched instinctively, desperately, for the people who weren't there. I knew I wouldn't find them, but my heart betrayed me, clinging to the smallest chance. And when I didn't see them, the ache spread through me like wildfire. I forced myself up the steps, one foot after another, my heels clicking against the wood. My hands felt clammy, my chest tight. All I could think was, don't trip, don't cry, don't let them see you break. The dean extended his hand, smiling warmly as he handed me the diploma. Congratulations, he said. His voice was kind, genuine, but his words, like the applause, felt empty without my family to echo them. I shook his hand, plastered on a smile, and faced the crowd as the photographer snapped my picture. That photo would go into the university's archive, maybe even onto the school's website. To everyone else, it would look like a young woman beaming with pride, celebrating her achievement. No one would ever know that in that moment, I felt like the loneliest person in the world. I stepped off the stage, my heart heavier than the diploma in my hands. My classmates were greeted with cheers, shouts, and camera flashes as they returned to their seats. I walked silently, the emptiness surrounding me louder than anything else in the room. When I sat down again, I tucked the diploma under my arm and stayed at the stage, pretending to pay attention. Inside, I was crumbling. My mind screamed questions that had no answers. Why wasn't I worth it? Why didn't they come? Why am I sitting here alone while they laugh at home over a football game? I wanted to disappear. I wanted to melt into the floor, vanish into the shadows, anything to escape the humiliation of being the only one without a family cheering. I knew some people had probably noticed. Maybe a classmate wondered why my section of the audience stayed quiet. Maybe someone saw me scanning the crowd with desperate eyes. The thought of pity burned worse than the absence itself. The rest of the ceremony blurred. I couldn't focus on the speeches, couldn't join in the laughter when classmates cracked jokes, couldn't celebrate when the crowd erupted for the last graduate. I just sat there, holding my diploma like a fragile lifeline, waiting for it all to end. Finally, the closing words were spoken. The music swelled. Caps flew into the air as cheers exploded around me. Students hugged their parents, their siblings, their friends. I stayed seated for a moment, watching the celebration unfold as if I were trapped behind glass. Everyone was laughing, crying, taking pictures, and there I was, alone. I rose slowly, clutching my cap, and made my way out of the auditorium. My steps were heavy, dragging, but the moment I stepped outside, the weight hit me harder than ever. Families crowded the parking lot, snapping photos, holding flowers, wrapping graduates in hugs. I walked past them, invisible, their joy like a spotlight on my emptiness. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of what I didn't have. A father lifting his daughter onto his shoulders, yelling, "That's my girl!" A mother crying into her son's gown, whispering how proud she was. A group of siblings holding a handmade banner with glittery letters spelling out, "We'll love you." I bit my lip until I tasted blood, holding back the sob that threatened to escape. My hands trembled as I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. I closed the door, shutting out the world, and for the first time all day, I let myself break. The tears came in waves, violent and unstoppable. My chest heaved, my body shook. I clutched the diploma against me as if it could absorb the pain, but it couldn't. Nothing could. This was supposed to be the proudest walk of my life. Instead, it was the most painful. Not because the walk itself was hard, but because with every step, I carried the weight of absence. With every clap of strangers' hands, I felt the silence of my family's betrayal. With every smile I forced, I felt my heart fracture deeper. That stage was supposed to be my moment of triumph. But for me, it became a stage of heartbreak, a cruel reminder that sometimes the people you need the most are the very ones who let you down the hardest. And by the time I wiped the last tear from my face, one thought had already taken root. I can't stay here. I can't keep living in the shadow of people who will never see me. Something has to change. The moment I shut the car door, the world outside went quiet, but inside me, a storm was raging. My breath came in sharp gasps, my body trembling as though every muscle had been waiting all day to collapse. The parking lot was still alive with celebration, families laughing, graduates shouting with joy. But in my car, it was silence broken only by the sound of my sobs. I buried my face in my hands, mascara streaking down my cheeks, my cap tossed carelessly onto the passenger seat. 4 years I had pictured this drive home differently. I imagined Mom sitting beside me, telling me how proud she was. I imagined Dad insisting on taking us all out to dinner, Mark joking about finally getting a smart sister, and Chloe snapping selfies with me, posting captions like #proudsis. Instead, I was sitting alone, my diploma resting on the dashboard like a cruel reminder that this achievement was mine alone to celebrate. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let the tears flow freely. Every memory of the ceremony replayed in my mind like shards of glass cutting me all over again. The empty seats, the hollow applause, the silence where cheers should have been. I thought of Dad yelling at the TV, cheering for a touchdown while I was walking across that stage. I thought of Mom arranging snacks in the kitchen instead of holding a camera in the audience. I thought of Mark high-fiving his friends, Chloe laughing at commercials, while I was swallowing loneliness in front of hundreds of strangers. The betrayal sank deeper with each sob. How could they not see me? How could I mean so little? I wiped my tears with the sleeve of my gown, but they came again, heavier, relentless. I wasn't just crying for the graduation they missed. I was crying for every time I had felt invisible. For every dinner where football mattered more than conversation. For every birthday that got overshadowed by a game. For every report card I proudly handed over, only to be met with distracted nods. This wasn't the first time I'd been ignored. It was simply the loudest. The loneliness in that car felt suffocating. It wasn't the kind that comes from being physically alone. It was the kind that comes from being surrounded by people your whole life but never truly seen. It was the ache of realizing you could scream your achievements into the world, and the people you loved most would still be too busy to listen. I glanced at my phone, sitting face up on the seat beside me. Notifications lit up the screen again, the family group chat still alive with laughter, updates, pictures of food spread across the living room table. My throat tightened as I scrolled. There was Dad, holding a plate of wings, grinning like a child. Mom, arranging nachos on the coffee table. Mark bragging about his game predictions. Chloe laughing at some halftime joke. They were smiling. They were happy. They were together. Without me. It was as though my existence had been erased, like I was a character written out of their story. My accomplishment, years of sweat, sacrifice, sleepless nights, wasn't even worth a mention. The ache turned into anger. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the sound sharp in the enclosed space. Why? I whispered, my voice breaking. Why wasn't I enough? The question echoed inside me, louder than my sobs. Why wasn't I worth putting the game on pause? Why wasn't I worth rearranging a party? Why wasn't I worth a few hours of their time? But deep down, I already knew the answer. To them, I had always been background noise. My father's love was reserved for football. My brother's loyalty was tied to the same passion. My sister followed their lead. And my mother, well, she always kept peace by bending toward them, even if it meant breaking me. That realization hurt more than the empty seats. It wasn't just that they had missed graduation, it was that they had chosen not to see me. Not today. Not ever. Tears blurred my vision as I stared out the windshield. Families were still out there in the parking lot, hugging tightly, holding flowers, snapping photos under the fading evening light. I envied them with every fiber of my being. I envied the girl whose father was spinning her around with pride. I envied the boy whose mom wiped away tears of joy. I envied every graduate who could look into the crowd and see love reflected back at them. And in that envy, something inside me hardened, because I realized that sitting there, crying into my sleeves, wouldn't change anything. My family wasn't going to suddenly show up, apologize, or magically transform into the people I needed them to be. They had made their choice, and if I stayed here, if I kept begging for their love in silence, I would always be second place. The heartbreak didn't fade, but it shifted. My tears slowed, my sobs quieted, and in their place, a different kind of voice began to rise within me. A voice that whispered, "You deserve better. You deserve more than empty seats. You deserve more than to be overlooked." I leaned back in the seat, wiping my face, my breath still shaky but steadier than before. For the first time in hours, my hands stopped trembling. I stared at the diploma, its gold seal catching the dim light. For years, I thought this paper would prove my worth to my family. But now, I understood. It wasn't for them. It was for me. And if I wanted a life where I was more than background noise, I would have to leave the script they had written for me. The heartbreak was still raw, the loneliness still sharp, but beneath it was the first flicker of something stronger. Not hope, not yet, but determination. I knew, sitting there in that car, mascara streaked and gown wrinkled, that this moment would define me more than any stage walk ever could. Because in the ashes of rejection, I felt the first spark of resolve. I couldn't stay. Not in this car, not in this city, not in the shadow of a family that never saw me. And as the last of my tears dried, one thought crystallized in my mind, clear and undeniable. I have to leave. The decision didn't come like thunder. It didn't crash into me suddenly. It was quiet, like the steady drip of water wearing down stone, until one drop finally split the rock open. Sitting in that parking lot, with the diploma glinting on my dashboard and the weight of my family's absence crushing my chest, I realized I had nothing left to wait for. I pulled out my phone, the same one still buzzing with a laughter-filled group chat. My thumb hovered over the screen, tempted to type something, anything, that would tell them how much they had broken me. A bitter part of me wanted to scream into that thread. I just graduated. None of you cared. None of you came. But what would it change? They weren't listening. They never had. So instead, I clicked out of the group chat and opened a different app. Flights. My heart raced as I typed in destinations, the cursor blinking like a dare. Where would I go? Where could I start again? For a moment, the idea seemed impossible. I had no plan, no savings cushion, no guarantee that life outside of this city, or this family, would be any kinder. But another voice cut through the doubt. What's the alternative? Staying here? Living in the same house where your dreams don't matter? Waiting for applause that will never come? That voice was right. If I stayed, nothing would change. If I left, maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. I thought about countries I had always dreamed of but never dared to say aloud. One stood out, Canada, a place that felt close enough to reach yet far enough to breathe. A country known for fresh starts, for opportunity, for space wide enough to rebuild a life. With trembling fingers, I booked a one-way ticket to Toronto. The confirmation email lit up my inbox like a spark in the darkness. I stared at the words, my pulse pounding. I had done it. I had bought myself freedom. The tears that came now were different. Not bitter, not heavy. They were lighter, like release. For the first time in years, I wasn't crying over being unseen. I was crying because I had finally chosen to see myself. I drove home that night not to celebrate, but to pack. The Carter household was alive with noise when I walked in, cheers, clinking glasses, the TV roaring with commentary. Nobody even noticed the gown I still wore. Nobody asked where I'd been. I moved quietly through the house, gathering clothes, important papers, my laptop. With every item I folded into my suitcase, the invisible chains loosened. At one point, Chloe glanced up from her phone and smirked. "What are you doing?" "Going somewhere." "Yes," I said simply. She laughed, assuming it was a joke, and went back to scrolling. None of them knew. None of them cared enough to ask. By dawn, I was gone. Landing in Toronto felt like stepping into another world. The air was cooler, crisper, and every street seemed to whisper possibility. At first, the loneliness followed me across borders. I carried it in the quiet hotel room where I spent my first nights. In the novice way I checked my phone, half hoping, half dreading a message from my family that never came. But loneliness here felt different. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't being ignored in the middle of noise. It was silence, yes, but a silence I could fill with my own voice. Within weeks, I found my first job, an entry-level position at a publishing company downtown. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't high-paying, but it was mine. I walked into that office every morning with my head held high, my diploma framed on the desk beside me, a quiet reminder of what I had accomplished without them. Each day brought small victories, finishing my first project, earning praise from my manager, making friends who celebrated even my smallest milestones. And with every step forward, I felt the toxic threads of my old life loosening. I didn't block my family right away. For a while, I left the chat open, scrolling occasionally, watching their lives unfold without me. Birthdays, barbecues, game nights, always centered around football, always with the same smiling faces. Never once did my name appear. And that was the final proof I needed. One evening, as the Toronto skyline glowed outside my apartment window, I scrolled through their photos one last time. My chest didn't ache the way it once did. It felt hollow, yes, but steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. With a deep breath, I pressed leave group. Then I deleted the chat, the numbers, the photos. I cut the last cord tying me to the people who had never chosen me. I expected it to feel like loss. Instead, it felt like breathing for the first time. Today, when I look back at that graduation night, I don't just see empty seats. I see the turning point of my life. I see the girl who walked across that stage alone, only to discover she was stronger than she ever knew. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 27 years old. I was the daughter, the sister, the invisible one in a family that worshipped games more than growth. But I am no longer that girl. Now, I am the woman who built a new life in Canada, who carved success from silence, who chose herself when no one else would. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Blood may tie you to people, but it doesn't bind you to misery. Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up, who claps the loudest when you win, who sees you when the world looks away. I cut the connection. I closed that chapter. And in doing so, I opened a new one filled with freedom, with self-worth, with beginnings that never would have been possible if I'd stayed chained to the Carter living room couch. This is my story, my heartbreak, my escape, my rebirth. And though it began with tears in a parking lot, it ends with strength in a city that finally feels like home.